keep us any longer from hearing from the first speaker. We'll go in order. Mr. Professor Tsai first, then Bob Sutter, then Sunja. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. Yes, I'm listening. Right. Yeah, pleasure to be here. In this panel, we are going to talk about the U.S.-China-Taiwan triangular relationship. Since I'm going to offer you a Taiwanese perspective, I would like to talk about cross-strait relations first, and then to see its political and strategic implications for the interaction among these three. I think when we talk about cross-strait relations, everybody knows that it has been improved since 2008. But if we do under the surface, I'm afraid there remain many uncertainties in the front. And I personally put it this way, that the current cross-strait relationship is stable, but not peaceful. So I think in the face of such a weird situation, United States, China, and Taiwan are all having their dilemma on handling their relationship with the other two. We can look at United States first. The improvement of cross-strait relations is a good thing for United States, because United States, won't be able. It can prevent United States from getting involved in a military conflict with China in the theater of the Taiwan Strait. However, if we take cross-strait rapprochement and the military imbalance into account altogether, then you come out with a very complicated situation for United States, in which United States need to keep a balance between its stable relations with China and security commitment to Taiwan. And I'm afraid a couple of problems United States may face, and I try to summarize them into at least 3 points. Number one, how can United States sustain increasing political pressure from China while offering very strong commitment to Taiwan's security? And number two, how can United States help Taiwan to defend itself against potential Chinese military coercion while China is rising as a military superpower in the region? And number three, how can United States pursue its policy of rebalance toward the Asia-Pacific region while military balance in the Taiwan Strait is shifting in China's big favor? So if we take all these issues all together, and I'm afraid there will be a policy dilemma in front of United States on handling its relations with both China and Taiwan. And now let's look at China. The improved cross-strait relations is also a good thing for China, at least in 2 ways. Number one, in the dimension of domestic politics, the improved cross-strait relations means Hu Jintao's policy of peaceful development is working very well. And this will be able to help Hu Jintao to identify his historical position, Li Dingwei. And also it's going to increase Hu Jintao's political leverage in the process of power transition in the coming months. And in the dimension of international strategy, I think the improved cross-strait relations is going to offer China some more years to achieve its strategic opportunities. In Mandarin, that means 战略机遇期. And that means China will be able to convert its attentions and resources from the Taiwan issue to some other policy issues that Beijing concerns, such as the protection of Chinese maritime rights in surrounding waters. And also, maybe China can benefit from the improved cross-strait relations. However, China also faces some problems. I try to summarize them into 3 points. Number one, the close relations is now become closer. However, both sides of the strait have totally different idea about the pace for close-strait political talks. After Taiwan's presidential election this year, Beijing has made it very clear it's very important to create a positive environment for close-strait political talks. In Mandarin, that means 为政治谈判创造有利条件、有利环境。However, on the Taiwanese side, the Ma Ying-jeou government continue to stick to the principle of economic first, politics later, so-called 先经后政. So we can see both sides of the strait have totally different tempo and idea about how soon both sides should initiate political talks. And also they have totally different expectation for an eventual unification. So that is the first problem in the front. And the second problem is that in the last 4 years, China has been trying very hard to improve its relations with Taiwan and make a lot of concessions to Taiwan, particularly on economic issue, so-called 让利. However, in the last 4 years, I think Arthur did mention this in the morning panel, saying that Taiwan's general public's identity of Taiwanese reached a new high, a historical high, about 52 or 53%. They regard themselves as Taiwanese. So this, shows a very interesting development. That is, Taiwanese people, they would like to see a closer economic cooperation with the mainland. However, Taiwanese people don't want to see a political integration with PRC in the near future. And I think it may be not that easy to find a way out for this situation. And I don't know when Beijing may lose its patience about this. So that is another problem in the front. And the third problem I found is that there remain many sensitive issues unresolved in terms of close-trade relations. For example, Taiwan's international participation, international space, Taiwan's sign of FTA with foreign countries, and the Chinese removal of ballistic missile against Taiwan. Those are quite sensitive issues and unresolved in the last 4 years. And I don't know, is it possible we can resolve all those issues in the next 4 years? And Beijing's dilemma here is that Beijing do want to win the hearts and minds of people in Taiwan, on the one hand. However, Beijing also worried that Taiwan may move toward de facto separation from the mainland, and that is the last thing Beijing want to see. So you can see how to keep balance between these two, policy stance. I think that may trouble Beijing a lot. And lastly, let's move to see Taiwan. Yes, Taiwan also benefit from the improvement of close-trade relations. It's a good thing for Taiwan because Taiwan can make use of this chance to normalize its economic ties with the mainland China. That's quite important for Taiwan during the international financial crisis. However, when Taiwan handled its relations with China and the United States, Taiwan also encountered some serious problems. I try to figure out two. The first one is that China has become Taiwan's biggest trade partner. And the United States is Taiwan's most important security partner. So for Taiwan, how to keep balance, strategic balance between these two giants? We know US-China relations cover both strategic cooperation and competition. So any issue concerning competition between the United States and Taiwan may place Taiwan in a very difficult position to make a choice between the two. I can give you an example. That's about South China Sea. When we have contacts with Chinese scholars, they usually like to make proposals for both sides of the strait to develop joint efforts to safeguard our Chinese sovereignty over the South China Sea. And some people from POA also made a proposal saying that both sides of the strait should make use of South China Sea as the pioneer region to develop close-strait confidence building measure. So when Taiwan faces those kind of proposals, we feel nervous. Right, we need to take into account U.S. position on the issue because United States is our big and good friend. However, we also have very close trade tie with China. So how to keep balance between the two? When the issue concerning disputes between United States and Taiwan. So how to make a choice between the two is a big problem for Taiwan in the future. And secondly, as I mentioned, the current close relations is stable, but not peaceful. So that is a very new security environment for Taiwan. I personally think it's time for Taiwan to review its defense posture, because a lot of important and serious issues deserve Taiwan to think about. This may include what kind of defense strategy Taiwan should pursue, what kind of weapon Taiwan should buy, what kind of doctrine and tactics Taiwan should carry out, what kind of measure Taiwan should take to deepen its defense ties with the United States. Also, when Taiwan handles all these issues, those sensitive issues, those important issues, Taiwan also needs to keep stable relations with China. I think that is not a very easy job for a small country like Taiwan. You know, there is a Chinese saying which goes, it's always a difficult job for a small country to make balance between two big powers. In Mandarin, that means 两大之间难为小. And I'm afraid Taiwan is now facing such a dilemma. So, you know, I hope I'm not too pessimistic, but you know, what I'm doing is that I just try to, sort out those uncertainties in the relationship. And I want to invite people to pay attention and then to make comments on those uncertainties in U.S.-China, Taiwan triangular relations, particularly close trade relations. So that's my observation, and I would like to offer them for your reference. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tsai. We now turn to Professor Sutter.
Thanks very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be invited to speak with you today. We're sort of looking at this situation in the cross-strait relationship and the relationship among the three governments from different perspectives, and I'm going to focus on the American perspective to a certain degree. My basic point is that I think Americans generally support what's happening in cross-strait relations. I think we see the governments of Taipei and the government in Beijing, they seem on balance to support the trend toward ever closer relationships in cross-strait relations. And I think the United States does too. My evidence for this is observing the coverage of these issues, but in particular, after the Maing-Zhou re-election, I attended or participated in 7 different events with big groups like this, even bigger. And there was uniformity on this issue. This was a good thing, that this had happened, that we're moving forward in the relationship, and Richard Bush characterized it as Ma's grand strategy, and that the Americans support the Ma's grand strategy. And I think that's correct. And I think it's important to remember that we're all feeling this situation, those of us that remember this, and most of us do. We went through a terrible period of turmoil in cross-strait relations from 1995 until 2008. It was very disruptive and nerve-wracking for Americans, and I think it was of concern with Taiwan. I think it was nerve-wracking for many others as well. And we certainly don't want to do that again. And so I think this keeps us moving forward in this direction. And I think we will. From the American side, I think there's strong support for this kind of an approach. But it does have some implications. And I tried to focus on the implications of this about a year ago in writing a piece that was a bit of a soul-searching for myself. So I don't want to be selfish about this, but I did want to share it. And it laid out what I saw as a result of this process. And it's clear that Taiwan is moving in a direction that's getting closer to China. And China's influence over Taiwan is growing as we speak. And we can talk about, and we have spoken a bit about the military, economic, and international dependence that Taiwan has vis-a-vis China. And we talked a bit this morning about Taiwan not being very vigorous in its self-strengthening. The defense issue was raised, and I think it's what we're seeing in defense strategy in Taiwan today is very different from the hard rock strategy that Maing-Zhou used in his platform to get elected in 2008. Things have changed to a considerable degree. And the third point that was mentioned this morning by Mr. Burkhardt, to some degree, is the eroding support for Taiwan in the United States. And the way I would characterize this is eroding support for a Taiwan that would take actions that would move in a direction different than what Minjo is moving today, in a direction that really would antagonize China, would go back to the former way that we experienced from 1995 until 2008. That type of support, I think, has diminished a lot. The U.S. willingness to do things for Taiwan that would really antagonize China. I think this is something that's, the support for that is less. And so in my writings on this, I've written only one thing on this really, but in my writing on this, I've tried to explain this and from my perspective. And Mr. Burkhardt got us off to a good start today because he said in the State Department at the time of the Taiwan Relations Act, before the Taiwan Relations, at the time of normalization, many people didn't think there would be a Taiwan in 2012. And I think this was widely held. This is not, he was accurate. And so what happened? Why didn't this happen? And I think part of the reason it didn't happen was because there were forces inside the United States that didn't want it to happen. And those forces had strong views, and they were reflected in the Taiwan Relations Act at that time. And I reflect on these because I was one of these people. And I think at that time there were basically three schools of thought in the United States, different than the administration. It's not that the administration was expedient. Some of the administration were expedient. There's no question about this. I think Professor Tucker has written eloquently about this, but many weren't. On the other hand, they were concerned with managing the relationship with China. And so they worked with Taiwan in the context of managing the relationship with China. And so they wanted to keep open the possibility of an agreement between China and Taiwan, this type of concern. So it limits your willingness to do things for Taiwan that would antagonize, in a major way, China. But there were some outside the administration who had stronger views, and some inside the administration too. And the three schools that I put, the first school where I put myself is that Taiwan is small and it's relatively weak vis-a-vis China. It's not going to get a good deal in negotiations with China. And therefore, Taiwan needs to be strengthened. It needs to be much stronger to deal with this type of situations. And that was a very strong view held by many, this was a long time ago, in the United States, as to why the United States should be more supportive of Taiwan, even if China didn't like it. The second group that shows itself at various times from the period in the late 70s up until the present is the idea that you can use Taiwan as a part of U.S. shaping policy toward China. That Taiwan is an element that you can use in your relationship with China that will move China in a direction that the United States wants China to move toward. And the third element that was present at this time was the anti-communist element. You can't trust communists, and therefore the support for Taiwan was very strong. And these people at the time of the Taiwan Relations Act, these people were doing this on the basis of what they believed. A lot was at stake, and yet they believed it, and they did it because they were prepared to pay the consequences to do it, confronting the administration if they needed to, this type of thing. Then we shifted our approach to Taiwan. Taiwan became very popular after Tiananmen, as we all remember. And there was very broad support for Taiwan. But this, ladies and gentlemen, proved to be very thin. Because what you found is that when the cost rose in this situation, what you found in this case is that these individuals really weren't that supportive of Taiwan. And so the Congress pushed very hard for Lee Teng-hui to get a visa to come to the Cornell University in 1995. And the moment the exercises began in the Taiwan Straits for the PLA, the Congress did nothing. Nothing. They just silent. And so this went on for months until January or February. So it started in the middle of '95. It lasted this long. And so I think it was thin. I think the support for Taiwan was thin under those cases. We do have another element which leads to American support for Taiwan, and that is partisanship. And partisanship can be very important in American politics, as we all know. It's a big issue in the United States today, in case those of you coming from other places may not be so familiar with this, but it's a big issue today. And partisanship has been an issue in cross-strait relations in the United States and a motivator for people to be very supportive of Taiwan to show their differences with the other party. And so that's an issue we need to keep an eye on if you're looking to the future and support for Taiwan. But I look at the situation today, and what I mean is, by eroding American support, is that the American government, the administration, wants this relationship to continue along the track that it's on. And that works well for U.S. interest, and I fully understand why they feel that way, and it enjoys broad support in the United States, if I can judge from those 7 sessions that I attended. Everybody was relieved that Ma Ying-jeou was elected, cross-strait relations would be relatively smooth. This is going to be good for the United States, and we all remember the bad old days under Chen Shui-bian and the latter part of Li Donghui's administration. But the people that are prepared to, so in that context, what could change that direction? What if Taiwan wanted something that the U.S. saw would really hamper our relationship with China? Well, they probably wouldn't get it. But if there were forces outside of this, they might push in this direction. But those forces, I think, are not there. And so those who felt you needed to support Taiwan, you need to give it time to become stronger, no deal with China today, they've been put aside. The administration wants more engagement in cross-strait relations, wants more engagement, not less. And so they're gone. They're gone. I'm getting old, and maybe I'm just a dinosaur in this regard. And so I've wrestled with this issue, and I found that nobody thinks the same way I do about this anymore. And so that's just passed. And I accept that. It's okay. The idea of using Taiwan to shape China. This idea, Richard Armitage was very good at this, shaping China, using this type of thing. And if you look at the Bush administration, George W. Bush, and how they came into office, they clearly used Taiwan as part of a major re-engagement with Asia to deter China, because they were worried about China perhaps getting the wrong idea from the, quote, soft, unquote, Clinton administration. And so Taiwan was front and center in that re-engagement. Now, Mr. Obama has this extensive re-engagement with China underway over the last several years. And I'm very glad to see it. I think it's wonderful. I like it very much. There's no Taiwan. Taiwan isn't dealt with that way. And they mention it every once in a while, but generally it's not mentioned. And Taiwan, as administration, doesn't seem to want to be part of this at all. They're very quiet about this as well. And so the shaping view, I think, is passé too. There's still some anti-communist around, but they don't matter much in U.S. foreign policy these days. And so what I sense is that those views are over, and the prevailing view is one that supports the administration in its efforts to support Ma Ying-jeou in his approach to move closer to China, which increases the dependence of Taiwan on China, and it limits Taiwan's room for maneuver. Will it lead to a settlement? I don't know. Can Taiwan reverse this? I would argue no. They can't go back. And I think the situation is such that they can't do that. And so that's an implication, but I think that's where we are. Now, as far as U.S. support in this type of situation, what could change this? Well, maybe Mr. Romney will make a difference. He's always complaining that Mr. Obama isn't tough enough. He wants to do this, that, and the other thing, and the salient issue is of course, the F-16's CDs. Now, we had a very good explanation from Alexander this morning as to why Taiwan will have a hard time finding the money to buy any F-16 CDs, which I think is good and accurate. But what I see in the case of Mr. Romney, I think partisanship might motivate a U.S. government to do a lot more do something more for Taiwan that would be quite disturbing to China. But in general, I don't see it. In general, I think if you look at public opinion in the United States does not like China, but public opinion in the United States does not want trouble with China. The media in this country generally reflects public opinion. And I don't think they want real trouble with China either on these kinds of issues. And Congress There are partisan interests in Congress, and I'm sure there are some true believers in Congress too. But I think partisanship is quite important in the Congress in dealing with this issue, and for partisan reasons they will attack. But at the end of the day, will they really pursue this? I doubt it. I think they're distracted with so many other different issues, for one thing. I think that Taiwan's economic importance is less, much less than it used to be to American constituents and the congressional people that represent Americans. The Taiwan lobby is fractured. They go in different directions. And China is troubled. And so I think the Congress will be reluctant to really take this one on as well. And so when I add it all up, I think the cross-strait relationship, judging from this morning's panel, will continue to go forward, slower perhaps, but will continue to go forward. And the American government will continue to think this is very good and will be supportive. The American government is not abandoning Taiwan. The American government will do its duty in deterring China if it attacks Taiwan. They don't want to do it, but they will do it. I'm convinced of this. But the trend is for ever closer Taiwan-China relations, Taiwan's dependence on China, and the Americans are very supportive of that process. And so it's steady as she goes, slower maybe, but steady as she goes. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. That's a very stimulating presentation, as was the first. This is not what you said, but as I listen to you, I'm thinking, when did we have an important disconnect between public opinion and concern about a foreign power that we didn't like? And I think of Mr. Roosevelt running for re-election in 1940 on an isolationist platform. Didn't get very far. But we now turn to our guest from Tsinghua University. Professor Sun is from Tsinghua. Tsinghua and Carnegie have a special program together. If you're ever in the Tsinghua area, please stop by the Carnegie Tsinghua Center, and we'll be happy to have you meet with our colleagues there. But Professor Sun, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I thank you, Doug, and the Mainland Commission of Taiwan to sponsor this and invite me to be here. And I'm willing to offer the mainland perspective on these cross-strait relations. My basic argument is, as a mainland Office of Taiwan Affairs, I think we see both black clouds and rainbows there. So we are willing to work with the United States, to work with Taiwanese friends, to turn the black clouds into rainbow. So that's my basic argument. So I would share three observations with you. The first is about some positive and negative signs before and after my won the election. Second is how the mainland China sees the transformation of DPP and the KMT. The third point is priorities and long-term goals of a mainland Taiwan policy. So let me get to my first point. I think overall speaking, the positive sign, we do see a lot of rainbows over the last 4 years. For example, we think the 3 links is a breakthrough. We think we signed the 16 agreements, including ACFA. And also because talking about people-to-people exchange, I think we think that's one of the credits both sides work on. That's great achievement because last year we have 7 million people go back and forth between mainland China and Taiwan. That's a remarkable number because you compare with follow that number is I think the China and South Korea. We have 6.3 million people go back and forth. And China, mainland China and Japan, we have 5.3 million people. Talking about China and the United States, we already celebrated our 40 years since President Nixon's visit. We still only have 3.5 million people, people-to-people exchange. So that is 7 million people. I think is a remarkable number. Talking about the positive sign right after the President Ma Ying-jeou won the election. I think we have 6 or 7 significant events. For example, Mr. Wu Boxiong visited mainland right away, right after the election, and with 3 vice chairmen of KMT. I personally met our president Hu Jintao, and he says he's a Hakka, but he's also Chinese. He says that in Taiwan, it's mainland affair commissions dealing with the mainland affairs rather than foreign ministry. So that means we both sides belong to one China. So that's one positive sign. The second positive sign is, I think, on May 18th, the Street Exchange Foundation proposed to set up a representative office in Beijing, and responded very positively by the ARADS, the Cross-Strait Relations Association in mainland. I think that also has a strategic value, and it's a symbolic move, a symbolic proposal. Third positive event, in President Ma Ying-jeou's inaugural address, he responded to the peaceful developments. And also he's less emphasized Taiwan's international space issue. He has a sense of getting more contact or emphasize coordination with mainland China on these international space issue. The next positive signs in President Ma Ying-jeou proceeded on April 3rd, I guess, proceeded over a ceremony in honor of Yellow Emperor. That's in Taipei. So that's, culturally speaking, show his determination to show his which you can call it an affinity with Chinese culture or whatever, fight against the pro-Taiwan independence cultural thought or whatever. Then we have a more positive signs. For example, Taiwan asked for more Chinese tourists to visit the island, these kind of things. The negative signs, we do see some negative signs. For example, after Mr. Wu Boxiong made that statement, and I think backfired in the island, so President Ma Ying-jeou mentioned in his inaugural address, and one China means ROC. So that's he speak of the differences. I think in some mainland people's eyes, that created new trouble. Another negative signs is he always, as Alexander mentioned this morning, he always link democracy, human rights, these issues with cross-strait relationship. But to be very honest, we have a lot of internal debate in mainland China. Some people really doubt the institutional attractiveness of American model democracy. With some people really criticize the lack of efficiency in the state, or lack of efficiency in Taiwan. So this is another story. And also negative signs, the 8th meeting of Chen Yuanlin and Jiang Pingkun was postponed. And the Pingtan special economic zone was with mainland trying to set up was criticized by some of the Taiwanese friends because it's competing with FTA in Kaohsiung, and also it's criticized. Some people think that it's a united front, piece of art, whatever. And then another negative incident is a cross-strait insurance agreement. We finished almost all the talk, but it's also postponed. And in late June, there's supposed to be a Taipei talk. 50 mainland scholars were invited to go to Taipei by Professor Zhang Yazhong. Some of them are famous scholars, some of them are bureau director of the Office of Taiwan Affairs, but they were rejected because the explanation is of those people who being rejected, they are not Pew scholar, but they are bureau directors at Office of Taiwan Affairs. So this is a negative sign. we understand that there are two backgrounds of these positive, negative developments. The first background is President Ma's approval rate, his supporting rate, is as low as 15%, in July 5th. And also because of the shadow. You can call it economic sunshine, or you can call it political shadow. You can see it all over in the island. So some people complain about the efficiency of the Ma's administration. Taiwan, 马办不如台湾. And some other complaints. So that's my first point. The second point is about the transformation of KMT and DPP in mainland's eyes. I think we understand that before the election, if you consider from the campaign scale, the personality, whether or not you are likable, and some other elements, social polls, surveys. I think Tsai Ing-wen and Ma Ying-jeou are on the same level. But why Tsai lost the election? Something wrong with, I guess, with the cross-strait relations. That's why inside the DPP, there are some people begin to review what's wrong with their own policy. For example, Hong Qi-chang, Guo Zhengliang, Chen Mingtong, those very important VIPs inside the DPP, trying to argue that Taiwan independence is a dead road. And that's why then chairman of the DPP, Chen Ju, gave a green light, allow some of these DPP people to visit mainland China, like Luo Zhisheng, attended the Tengchong conference. And so we predicted that in the near future that the DPP will keep their strategic goals for independence will not change. At least they won't change the party doctrine. However, they probably will take a more flexible approach and deal with the cross-strait relations. And also they will be more friendly towards mainland China. So that's the basic evaluation, prediction of their policies. I think the difficult part of the dealing with DPP is, I think, for mainland China, for mainland government, we should recognize that the DPP is a legitimate party. Right now, we don't say it. So we should tell the public DPP is a legitimate party in Taiwan. And also, we should set up a CCP DPP forum like we did with KMT. And I think the transformation of DPP is will be closely intertwined with the change, a transformation of CCP's policy towards the DPP. So that's the attitudes on our own reconsideration of transformation of the DPP. On the KMT, I think we think the President Ma Ying-jeou has really its lack of coordination with legislature in Taiwan and also with local government. So there is some problem with his ability to govern. So there is a saying that 令不出总统府，政不出行政院. So people really complain about him. And also the second issue is about corruption. And the third issue is about the even on cross-strait relations. When Mr. Wu Xiong made that announcement, then the intelligence community in Taiwan, they didn't know that. So that shows the lack of coordination inside the KMT. And on foreign policy, so-called, I think President Ma is trying to adopt a 亲美友日 和中 strategy, means taking a pro-United States policy, trying to be friends with Japan, trying to build up a peace with mainland. However, he's trying to build up strategic dialogue, 2+2, with United States, with India, with Japan. That shows he's trying to use foreign pressure or foreign leverage to counterbalance the mainland's influence. So that is some of these complaints inside the mainland China. So that is our evaluation of KMT. Well, on the future or perspectives of cross-strait relations, first of all, I would like to say stability of the cross-strait relations will be very, very important. We really care about it because without stability, mainland, we try to buy some time, to deal with East China Sea problem, to deal with South China Sea problem, so we don't want any trouble. The current priority for mainland is we're trying to explain to the Taiwanese people, trying to make it more transparent of the 18th Party's Congress, and trying to tell people in Taiwan this is going to be smooth transition, won't affect the cross-strait relations, won't have any significant dramatic change of the cross-strait relation. Also, we'll pay more attention on the APEC in September, and we'll create a more friendly environment, atmosphere for the meeting of Lian Zhan and President Hu Jintao. And also next year we'll pay more attention on the study election, which will be held in 2014, July 21st, and 2014, the local election in Taiwan. The long-term goals, I guess, I have a couple of points. I think the first priority, we will study the institutional design of the future potential unification. Even though some of our Taiwanese friends don't like that idea, but I think the mainland China is now ready, because in 1980s we had a different debate on one country, two system, different designs and confederacy, federation, whatever. But now, because in 1990s we spent too much time on fight against Li Denghui, and after year 2000 fought against Chen Shui-bian. So now it's time to study the future institutional design, and we'll begin with second track. We'll move to the government-to-government talk. The second priority, long-term priority goal is we want to consolidate economic foundations between our two sides. Because we have a couple of agreements trying to, which are right now is being worked on. One is a mutual investment agreements and service trade and the tariffs, these kind of agreements. We are working on this. I think from mainland point of view, we are not satisfied. There's only $300 million US dollars investment in Taiwan. We hope Taiwan can open up its door, can invite more Chinese business people to invest. We want to have a real economic integration to create a Chinese brand, to create a common Chinese market. So that is the second priority. Some other priority like cultural exchange, and also I think the most important task in the future is for the people-to-people exchange. I think if you study Jia Qinglin, if you study President Hu Jintao's different talks, you will see they really care about to win the hearts and minds of Taiwanese people. So we actually studied the situation. We realized there's over 6,000 communities in Taiwan, and over 10,000 NGOs in Taiwan. So the slogan in China, mainland China, is we want to have an influence in every village, every household, But anyway, my conclusion is that as long as the CCP, the mainland government, sees Taiwan as a political and economic market, as long as the CCP want to compete with the KMT, with DPP, to win the hearts and minds of Taiwanese people, will be a good thing, even though for the mainland's political reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sun. I think our three speakers have really teed up a lot of very interesting issues, and I can't think of anybody more able or informed to take these issues on than Bonnie Glaser. Please.
Thank you, Doug, and thanks to the Carnegie Endowment for organizing this conference today and inviting me to serve as a discussant on this panel. Three very, very interesting presentations. I couldn't help but think when I was listening to Professor Sun's comments that you really focused on the cross-strait relationship, had a lot of very interesting things to say. I think it's an excellent analysis, but the U.S. was somehow missing in it. And this is a panel on the U.S. mainland Taiwan. But I can only conclude, Sunja, that you think that the U.S. has little role to play in this relationship. But I'll give you a chance to I will give you a chance in the Q&A to rectify that if you want to talk a little bit about the U.S. role. So my comments will focus mostly on Professor Tsai and Professor Sutter's comments. Because we did talk a bit about the cross-strait relationship in the first panel, but I really do appreciate, Swinja, your assessment of the positives and the negatives and some of the objectives, and so I think it was a very good analysis. The two papers that were which I read in advance that Professor Tsai and Professor Sutter wrote, I really thought were quite interesting, and they raised some important questions. And in a sense, they both are somewhat pessimistic, as I think our two speakers were this morning. They paint a somewhat bleak picture of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship and also of cross-strait relations. Now, Professor Tsai wrote in his paper on the issue, for example, of U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, that China strongly opposes U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, and that Washington has to avoid offending Beijing, and that Taiwan, therefore, can only buy items that Beijing approves of. Professor Sutter writes at length and talked this afternoon about the waning of U.S. support for Taiwan. And it was interesting to me that both of them said that the U.S. officials haven't mentioned the upgrading of U.S.-Taiwan relations in their various official presentations that they have given, and I thought it was interesting that both of them called attention to that. This was really, I think, quite a contrast with what we heard from Ray Burkhart this morning. And so, it's interesting to really try and understand whether it is Ray Burkhart's perception of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship that is correct, or whether it is this other perception. There are elements certainly of both. I mean, if we focus, for example, on congressional attitudes on the Taiwan issue, I think that Bob Sutter does a very good job of this in his paper, and has a wealth of experience dealing with Congress. I think it is undoubtedly true that there has been a decline in U.S. support. I'm not so sure that this is true at the executive branch level, and this is, of course, the emphasis that we heard this morning from Ambassador Burkhart. Now, specifically on the issue of U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, I would say the U.S. is willing to pay a price in its relations with China to continue fulfilling its commitments to Taiwan. And I think that we've seen that. Many of you may have read Jeff Bader's book, which he wrote after leaving the administration, serving in the National Security Council. And he writes that the growing disparity between the military capabilities on the two sides of the strait has made it unrealistic to conceive of selling arms for the purpose of providing Taiwan with a sufficient deterrent to defend itself. So he outlines what he sees as three basic purposes for U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. One is to provide Taiwan with sufficient capability to withstand an attack from China long enough for U.S. assistance to arrive and turn the tide. Secondly, to signal continuing U.S. commitment to Taiwan's security. And thirdly, to demonstrate U.S. credibility to other friends, allies, and partners in the region who would be alarmed at China's use of force against Taiwan and would want to see the U.S. Stand up to that. Now, I would add to that, in fact, a fourth purpose, which we have heard many U.S. officials talk about publicly, as well as scholars, and that is to provide confidence to Taiwan to continue the dialogue with the mainland after all, a weak and vulnerable Taiwan might view this dialogue, cooperation, problem solving with the mainland as risky. So I would say that in the future, there may be differences in the US about what to sell Taiwan and when to announce decisions on arms sales, but not over whether to sell arms to Taiwan. I think that the US will continue to work closely with Taiwan to help bolster its security, and arms sales will remain an important part of that strategy. But we should also be clear that arms sales are not the sum total of every element of the US-Taiwan security relationship. And again, Ambassador Burkhardt talked about that this morning. Now, the second point, which I'll just make briefly, Bob, you wrote in your paper that the US ability to intervene militarily in Taiwan contingencies remains strong, but the reluctance of US leaders to do so grows. And I was really struck by that, because I would argue that the US ability to intervene militarily without paying a high price is actually being challenged. And it may get more difficult with time, but I can't conclude that US leaders would be reluctant to intervene, because I think that decision is going to be contingency dependent. It's going to depend on how the conflict starts. And so I personally believe that if Taiwan is threatened militarily, certainly without provoking a strike, a US president, to coin a phrase, will not stand idly by. My third point is about this issue of the lack of upgrading of US-Taiwan relations, and whether this is a correct or appropriate indicator of the state of the US-Taiwan relationship. And I would take issue with this criterion. I mean, the first question is, have we seen more high-level visits? And again, we heard this morning, the AID administrator went last year, our Deputy Secretary of Energy. The fact that we haven't seen more high-level visits is because of the frozen
oxygen until it's gone. And one thing that has not been discussed this morning is the impending challenges to the American defense budget and its posture in the region. And as people go forward thinking on these subjects, I might ask you to introduce that into your thinking as well. Let's start with Professor Tsai for immediate response.
I'd like to thank Bonnie for those valuable comments. I just want to offer some responses for those points she just mentioned. And the first issue is about why I mentioned Taiwan may suffer a dilemma of making strategic balance between China and the United States. The reason I mentioned this point is not saying that Taiwan wants to make this choice. The reason why I mentioned this is that Taiwan doesn't want to make the choice, but I'm afraid the choice is turning out now. Yeah, because on June 8th this month, Chinese paper mentioned this point. They say United States is now returning back to Asia, and now close relations is becoming closer and closer. Taiwan is not supposed to keep a neutral position between the two. So I'm not saying that we want to make a choice. What I'm saying is that the choice is coming, proposed by the Chinese scholars. So the reason why I mentioned that is, for Taiwan is a small power, and according to the theory of international politics, for small power, when we face threat from big power, we can have only two options. Number one is balancing, and number two is bandwagoning. So what I'm saying is that if the United States reduces its security commitment to Taiwan, how can Taiwan balance against China's military threat on its own? Even though we can find the third option in the between, so-called hedging. If we want to take the hedging strategy against China, we also need to, have some security commitment from the United States. Otherwise, Taiwan would be not able, to face China's threats on its own. And that's the reason why I mentioned, so-called strategic choice between the United States and China. I just want to invite people to pay more attention to those strategic dilemma that I'm afraid Taiwan may need to face in the future. And also, another point is about U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. Actually, I think United States is going to sell weapons to Taiwan under TRA. And Taiwan will buy those weapons based on our security consideration. Certainly, China would oppose those arms deals. So you can see a deadlock among these three. And the only way out is that these three countries need to reach some compromise. And what worries me is that can Taiwan's voice be heard in the process of reaching compromise? And if Taiwan's voice cannot heard, that's why I'm saying, Taiwan can only buy those weapons that Beijing approve. So that's my worry. That's my worry here. And I think Bonnie also mentioned that maybe United States and Taiwan can try to proceed some high-level visits or to develop closer trade ties. But I think apart from those measures, we still need to think what kind of pillars, which can support U.S. and Taiwan bilateral relations. We need to find out some pillars. Otherwise, if we just talk about those official visits or just talk about those trade ties, I think that's still too weak to offer a very strong support for U.S.-Taiwan bilateral relations. We need to figure out something. Yeah, I don't know what would it be, but what I'm saying is that without strong support or without strong pillar, I'm afraid U.S. support to Taiwan may erode, just like Professor Schultz mentioned. So that's my points for Bonnie's reference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tai. One of the things that also that has not been discussed today is not so much the sentiment or calculation of interest, but the utility of a strategy for the United States in managing the rise of China and the utility of arms sales or the defense relationship, more broadly speaking, in shaping China's foreign policy behavior. With that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Bob Sutter, for your comments.
Well, as I tried to indicate, I think Taiwan is not part of the shaping very much these days, Doug. But thanks to Bonnie for a very thoughtful commentary. The basic point of my message is that Taiwan is ever dependent on China. It's moving closer to China, and the U.S. administration is basically supportive of this process and wants to see it continue. Bonnie indicated her comments and Ray's comments this morning focused on the administration, and I agree with everything she said, and I agree with everything Ray said. But the administration isn't the only element that makes American interaction with Taiwan. It's a very important element, but it's not the only one. Congress is part of the government, but and Bonnie recognized the change in congressional attitudes to some degree. But my basic point is that the administration's support for Taiwan is such that if Taiwan were to deviate from this current path that it's on and to return to something that would be more fractious, I think the administration would be not very supportive of that. And I think that other elements in the U.S. society wouldn't be very supportive either. And so Taiwan's freedom of action is reduced under these circumstances. There isn't too much concrete evidence that I can point to on this, but I found that when Tsai Ing-wen as a candidate visited the United States, and she didn't have a clear view, or at least it wasn't satisfactory to the administration took actions which are very contrary to American practice, which were seen as interfering in the election in Taiwan by sort of taking sides and saying this was not satisfactory to them. That Tsai didn't have an approach to the mainland that was going to work for the interests of the United States, and therefore they weren't going to let the world know about it, and they did. And that's quite serious. And so I think that just, to me, that underlined this unwillingness of the United States to take actions that would support tendencies in Taiwan that would be seen as very disruptive toward China and therefore not in the interest of the United States. It's that kind of limitation that I see. And so I think we're on a path, and if Taiwan deviates from this path in a significant way that's going to disrupt the relationship with China, I think the U.S. is not going to support it, and it might even work against it. That's my basic point. And therefore, Taiwan's freedom of action is constricted in this regard, and it's also constricted because of its ever-growing dependence on China and because of its relatively mediocre self-strengthening efforts.
Thank you, Bob. Professor Sun.
Thank you. Let me make 2 points. I think when we think about the American policy towards Taiwan, and also in Chinese we use American elements in the cross-strait relations. Right now, the tendency for the scholars, a member of think tanks in China, we always think about the positive side. Can these three parties work together to try to consolidate the peace and development across strait? So that's one of the upbeating tone. I think is a consensus. Also, we do give a credit to the United States for supporting the 92 consensus, and also to support, as Bob mentioned, these positive developments across the strait. So that's the message we want to send. We in mainland do have we do have a strategic patience, even though some of the scholars calculated, even though in 2016 DPP come back to power, we bet that DPP won't change the policy because you really need to win the heart and mind of Taiwanese people. As long as those people, island people, enjoy the economic benefit, so the mainstream thinking in mainland is something. It doesn't matter faster or slower of the cross-strait relations, how fast or how slow it goes, as long as we can keep some kind of a stability. So that is very important. If the DPP failed to support the current policy, and then we will see another change of the rule, change of through another election. So we are willing to wait. So that is why I'm saying that we consider Taiwan as a political market. Three parties trying to compete. So that's one point. Second point is on arms sales issue. So we do have a lot of complaints on arms sales because if you compare the previous administration, President Bush Jr., and the current President Obama's decision, we see the $12 billion arms sales two decisions that have been made over the last 4 years. That is something I think we do worry about it. But however, in mainland China, I'm not sure if, how our Taiwanese colleagues think about it. In mainland China, we don't talk that much about the mainland China poses a serious military threat towards Taiwan. We do recognize, we do think that all the military deployments, increase of Chinese military power is actually it's anti-access denial or targeting on the United States, but we don't say it, right? So this is a very unique situation here. Both leadership in mainland China and the United States, we think that a good relationship between our two countries are good for each of the government. So we have to live with each other. But two military actually see each other as a potential enemy. So that is a very unique what Professor Hu Jintao, President Hu Jintao says. The 新型大国 was a new type of big power relationship. I think you don't see that in Cold War area. So the military see each other as a potential number one enemy. But however, even though we think we see each other as a number one enemy, we already set up a mute-to-mute talks. There are probably 60 plus talks between our two governments. There are 3 sets of very, very important mute-to-mute talks between our two militaries. So even after President Obama made the last arms sales decision, we still have a low-level military exchange program continue going on. So we send our soldiers, low-level military students to West Point. So we still have this kind of exchange program. So my point is, we do have a complaint about American arms sales. I think there's in the future, if Taiwanese
people in Taiwan forget about the fact that China poses this really large military threat to the island. And so I guess I think that people in Taiwan should be clear about the role that the mainland plays in their security and the role that the United States plays. Maybe striking that balance for Taiwan shouldn't be so difficult. If you have clear what your strategic priorities are and where your security lies and what your strategy is to cope with it. My final comment is that I think, again, it was Professor Tsai that he foresees troubles ahead because Beijing will demand progress on political issues. And I think we also talked about this morning. This is a commonly raised issue. How much longer will Beijing continue to hold this policy of strategic patience, he writes, and offer policy concessions to Taiwan? And I would say that the onus really shouldn't be on Taiwan, of course, here. It really should be, at least in part, on Beijing. And he writes correctly that the majority of people in Taiwan do view the mainland as hostile. And it's up to China to build, to do more, to help build this domestic consensus on Taiwan for opening political talks. The fact that so many people on Taiwan are worried about this when President Ma raised it during the campaign, the idea of striking a peace accord, is not just because there has been a failure to forge this political consensus on Taiwan. There's obviously a lot of suspicion in Taiwan towards China. So winning over the hearts and minds, I think, is something that China needs to do. Now, there are other ways that the relationship can progress. There was a little bit of discussion in some of these papers and also this morning about military confidence building measures, which I have talked about. And I personally believe that there's no necessary linkage between a peace accord and military CBMs. I think that specific confidence building measures, not anything you could come up with, but targeted ones that would reduce the possibility of an accident, enhance predictability, reduce misperception, the possibility of miscalculation, would be very much in Taiwan's interests. But finally, on this issue of whether or not Beijing will continue to hold strategic patience, now I would look out over the next 2 to 3 years and say Beijing has every reason to continue to be patient, try and build on a common ground with Taiwan, maybe set aside the things that they disagree on, and try to broaden that area where they do agree. But very quickly, somewhere within 2 or 3 years, Taiwan's elections are going to capture a great deal of attention, and I think Beijing will forget about the issue of trying to get a peace accord signed. They'll be worried once again about the DPP coming back to power. And after 8 years of one party in power in any democracy, the people are usually ready for a change. It's not true in every democracy, but I think the odds increase that we could see a DPP president. And so I think that China will be worried about that again. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there'd be heightened tensions across the strait, but I think then China's priorities and its concerns will change. The lack of progress toward political dialogue or a peace accord, I don't think will be their main concern. So I'm not sure that today that we need to look at over the next 4 years and be so worried about the lack of progress in that area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, for digging into these papers and offering your own observations. I'm going to ask each of the presenters to make a brief comment on